My name is Audra. I am 34 years old, and just 3 days after burying my husband, Nathaniel, I found myself standing in a crowded backyard for my nephew Lucas' first birthday party. My mother Brenda and my father Harrison had practically dragged me there, insisting that family comes first. But as I stood near the patio, trying to hold back my tears, my sister Sierra tapped her champagne glass to silence the crowd. With fake tears streaming down her perfect face, she announced to everyone that her son was actually Nathaniel Child. She claimed they had a secret affair, and then she pulled out a typed will. She looked me dead in the eyes and demanded half of my $8 million mansion as inheritance for his supposed bloodline. I did not scream or cry. I just looked at the piece of paper, smiled coldly, and said, "Oh, I see." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud, because I knew a medical secret about my late husband that made her entire story a biological impossibility. Before I tell you exactly how I let my greedy sister dig her own grave, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe. If you have ever had to protect your peace from a toxic family, you will want to hear what happened next. The silence in the backyard was deafening. The gentle breeze rustled the blue birthday streamers, but nobody dared to breathe. I watched as Sierra wiped a perfectly timed tear from her cheek, holding that fraudulent piece of paper like a winning lottery ticket. Nathaniel was a high school history teacher who loved his students and loved our life together. He had died suddenly from an aneurysm, just weeks after his 35th birthday. My heart was still shattered into a million pieces, yet here was my younger sister, 30 years old and always the golden child, using my tragedy as a stage performance to steal my property before I could even process the sheer audacity of her lie. My parents leaped into action. They did not rush to comfort the daughter who had just become a widow. They did not ask if I was all right. Instead, my mother, Brenda, marched right past me and wrapped her arms around Sierra. My father, Harrison, stepped forward with his chest puffed out, putting on his best authoritative voice. He looked at me with the exact same look of disappointment he had used to control my entire life. "Audra, you need to be reasonable about this," my father announced loudly enough for all the guests to hear. "We know you are grieving, but Nathaniel has a son. You cannot just hoard that massive house all to yourself. You have to do the right thing for his bloodline." My mother nodded vigorously, rubbing Sierra back. "You have always been so selfish with your wealth, Audra. You stage those luxurious multi-million-dollar mansions for your corporate clients, and you live like a queen while your sister struggles. It is only fair that Lucas gets what his father wanted him to have. Do not make this a legal battle. Just sign the deed over." The sheer entitlement made my blood boil, but I maintained my icy composure. I looked past my delusional parents and locked eyes with DeAndre. He was Sierra's hardworking husband, a 32-year-old restaurant manager who had always treated me with genuine kindness. DeAndre stood frozen near the barbecue grill. The paper plate he had been holding slipped from his hands and crashed onto the patio. Baked beans and potato salad splattered across his shoes, but he did not even flinch. His dark brown eyes were wide with sheer devastation. He was an honest African Amian man who worked 60-hour weeks to provide for a child he believed was his own. Now his wife was standing in front of their friends and neighbors, publicly declaring she had slept with her dead brother-in-law. DeAndre Sierra started reaching a hand out toward him, but her voice lacked any real remorse. "I am so sorry you had to find out this way." DeAndre did not say a word. He stepped back from her touch, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Sierra let out a dramatic sob, playing the victim perfectly. "See what you made me do," she wailed, pointing an accusing finger at me. "My marriage is ruined because you would not just quietly share your wealth." I took a step forward, and the entire crowd seemed to brace for an explosion. But I did not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I had spent my entire life being the responsible scapegoat. Now they wanted my house. I reached out and plucked the typed will right from Sierra. Trembling hand. The paper felt cheap. I scanned the text quickly. It was riddled with 10 basic formatting errors. Nathaniel was the most meticulous man I had ever known. He would never draft a legal document that looked like a high school homework assignment. assy, but the real joke was the demand itself. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my designer purse. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention today, Sierra," I said, my voice perfectly level. "It is incredibly enlightening." My father scoffed. "We expect you to hand over the keys soon." I looked at him, feeling the very last threat of my loyalty snap completely. "You are right, Dad," I replied smoothly, turning away from them. "But you people are just strangers who happen to share my DNA. Do not call me. If any of you step foot on my property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." As I gripped the steering wheel and drove away from that wretched party, I smiled, knowing I held the weapon to destroy their arrogant lives forever. I had just pulled my car into the immaculate driveway of my estate, the iron gates closing securely behind me, when I saw a familiar truck speeding down the avenue. It was DeAndre. He had left the party abruptly, leaving his unfaithful wife behind to deal with the mess she created. His hands must have been gripping the steering wheel with the same crushing betrayal I had felt when I lost Nathaniel. But my grief was born of a tragic medical event, while his was born of a vicious, calculated lie. I stepped into my silent home. The massive crystal chandelier cast a cold, bright light over the empty foyer. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I walked into my home office, locked the heavy wooden doors, and waited. I knew my family. I knew they would not let this go quietly. They needed a villain to fund their lazy lifestyle, and they had just elected me to play the part. The explosion took exactly 48 hours to detonate. On Tuesday morning, my phone began vibrating violently against the kitchen counter. Notifications poured in faster than my eyes could track them. Pings from Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn flooded my locked screen. I opened the first link sent by a concerned colleague. Sierra had not just played the victim in private, she had gone completely nuclear. She had posted a highly edited, heavily filtered video of herself, sitting on the floor of her cramped living room, clutching little Lucas to her chest. She wept beautifully for the camera. She claimed that Nathaniel had been the love of her life. She painted a tragic, completely fabricated picture of star-crossed lovers kept apart by duty. Then she dropped the real poison. She called me a barren, heartless widow. She told the internet that because my own womb was empty, my heart had turned to stone. She claimed I was deliberately hiding Nathaniel assets and trying to throw my own flesh and blood nephew out onto the streets to starve. Directly below the video was a link to a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help a Fatherless Child Survive His Cruel Aunt." The campaign had already raised $15,000 from gullible strangers. My parents had immediately shared the post. But my mother, Brenda, wrote a lengthy caption detailing how she had failed to raise me with proper Christian values. My father, Harrison, commented that he was utterly ashamed to share my last name and begged his powerful business connections to donate to Sierra. I scrolled through the comments, feeling a surreal mix of disgust and fascination. Strangers were calling me a monster. Local community groups shared the video demanding justice for the poor single mother. The sheer hypocrisy of it all was suffocating. I decided to drop a single comment to provide some much-needed context to the digital mob. I typed out the harsh reality of our family dynamic. I reminded everyone reading that I had been the sole financial backbone of the family for a decade. I asked my mother if she remembered the $30,000 I paid to clear Sierra credit card debt when she faced bankruptcy. I asked my father if he recalled how I bought Sierra her first car after she totaled his while driving under the influence. I pointed out that Sierra was continuously coddled, shielded from consequences, and bailed out of every single mistake she ever made. While I built my luxury staging business from the ground up with zero help, I hit send. It was a massive mistake. The internet does not care about logic or financial receipts when they have a crying mother holding an innocent baby to pity. My comment only poured gasoline on the fire. They accused me of gaslighting my sister, of using my massive wealth to bully a vulnerable woman. The narrative spun entirely out of my control. The real nightmare began the following morning. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, determined to maintain my professional routine. Audra Staging LLC was currently handling the interior design for 3 major penthouses downtown, and I had a staff of 20 people. depending on my leadership. I drove my car toward the corporate plaza, but as I turned the corner, my heart sank into my stomach. A crowd of about 40 people had gathered on the sidewalk, directly outside the glass doors of my corporate office. They were holding up handmade cardboard signs. Justice for Lucas, share the wealth, boycott or staging. Neat Sierra had tagged my business page in her latest post, and her mob of online defenders had mobilized into the real world. I parked in the underground secure garage and took the private elevator up to my floor. My receptionist looked completely panicked. The phones were ringing off the hook. Clients were calling, demanding to know why there was an angry protest outside the building. Two high-profile real estate developers emailed me directly, expressing deep concern over the negative public relations. In the luxury staging business, reputation is everything. My parents and my sister knew exactly what they were doing. They were hitting my livelihood to starve me out. They wanted to make me so desperate and so universally hated that I would simply sign over the deed to the $8 million house just to make the nightmare stop. They thought they could break me with public shame. They assumed, because I had always been the responsible, quiet daughter who dutifully paid their bills and absorbed their insults, that I would eventually fold under the pressure of a public scandal. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, looking down at the angry protesters swarming the pavement below. They chanted slogans demanding I give up my wealth to a child that did not even belong to my husband. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Harrison. The message read, "Sign the house over, Audra. We can call off these people today. Do not ruin your precious company over your stubborn pride. Do the right thing for Nathaniel's son." I stared at the glowing screen. They really believed they had me trapped. They believed that public humiliation and the threat of losing my corporate clients would force my hand. I locked my phone and placed it on my desk. Let them protest. Let them scream. They were playing checkers while I was setting up a completely different game entirely. I turned away from this glass window, leaving the sight of the chanting mob behind me. I walked back to my mahogany desk to review the morning reports, but a sharp knock interrupted my focus. My receptionist stepped into the office looking even more flustered than before. She apologized and stepped aside, revealing a tall man in a cheap gray suit holding a thick manila envelope. He did not ask for permission to enter. He simply walked straight up to my desk and dropped the heavy envelope right on top of my keyboard. "You are served," he announced flatly, turning on his heel and walking out just as quickly as he had appeared. I stared at the envelope. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I picked it up and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. The header on the first page immediately caught my attention. It bore the logo of the most notoriously aggressive probate litigation firm in the city. They were the kind of lawyers who thrived on tearing families apart for a percentage of the settlement. Sierra and my parents had not just hired any attorney to bully me. They had hired a shark. I flipped through the pages, reading the legal jargon with growing disbelief. Sierra had officially submitted the forged will to the court, but she had not stopped there. Attached to the probate filing was an emergency injunction signed by a judge just hours ago. I read the order twice to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me. The injunction mandated an immediate and temporary freeze on all of my personal bank accounts. Every dollar I had in my checking and savings was completely locked down. I could not withdraw a single cent to buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay my corporate staff. The legal chokehold tightened as I reached the third page. The court had also granted a temporary lien against my $8 million mansion. The property was legally frozen. I could not sell it, transfer it, or leverage it until the probate investigation concluded. Sierra had claimed that she and her son were at imminent risk of homelessness, and that I was a flight risk who might liquidate Nathaniel's supposed assets to hide the money. The judge acting on the fabricated SAB story had granted the emergency freeze. I sat down heavily in my leather chair. The sheer audacity of the attack was staggering. They had weaponized the justice system against me based entirely on a cheap lie. They wanted to paralyze me financially, so I could not fight back. They wanted me to feel the walls closing in until the pressure became absolutely unbearable. I looked at the frozen accounts on my laptop screen. My personal funds were completely inaccessible. For a fleeting second, a wave of genuine panic threatened to wash over me. Then my private office line rang. The caller identifications displayed my father number. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression even though he could not see me. I picked up the receiver and brought it to my ear without saying a word. Audra, my father. Bill Harrison spoke, his voice practically dripping with smug satisfaction. I assume you have received the delivery from our legal representatives by now. I remained silent, letting him fill the quiet space with his arrogance. You left us no choice, Audra, he continued, sounding like a disappointed principal, reprimanding a stubborn student. We tried to handle this internally like a family. But you had to be difficult. You had to cause a scene at the birthday party and disrespect your sister. Now the courts are involved. Your personal money is gone. Your house is locked down. You are completely cornered, and you have absolutely no way out of this mess. I stared at the legal documents on my desk, listening to the man who was supposed to protect me actively participating in my destruction. What exactly do you want, Dad? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly hollow and defeated. I needed him to believe that his aggressive strategy was working. We want what is fair, Harrison replied quickly. We want you to sign the deed of the house over to Sierra today. If you stop being so stubborn and just transfer the property to Nathaniel bloodline, we will call off the lawyers. We will drop the injunction immediately. We will even go out there and tell those protesters that it was all a big misunderstanding. We are willing to forgive you for your hostility, Audra. We just want peace for the baby. The word forgive echoed in my ear. They were offering to forgive me for surviving their vicious smear campaign and their illegal extortion. They wanted to steal an $8 million asset and then have me thank them for letting me keep the rest of my life intact. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. You really think this is going to work? I asked, my tone dropping an octave. You think freezing my personal checking account is going to break me? You cannot fight us without money, Audra. My father countered, his tone hardening. You cannot pay a legal team to drag this out in court when your accounts are frozen. The house is locked. The public hates you. Your corporate clients are going to drop you by the end of the week when they see the news. You are entirely alone. Sign the paperwork and this all goes away. Do the right thing before you lose your business too. I looked out the window at the protesters still marching on the pavement below. I looked at the injunction freezing my personal assets. My father was right about one thing. They had backed me into a corner. But what he completely failed to realize was that cornering a predator only makes it infinitely more dangerous. I will carefully review the documents you sent, I said, injecting just enough hesitation into my voice to make him think I was finally cracking. I need time to think about my options. Do not take too long, Audra, my father warned triumphantly. The longer you wait, the worse this gets for you. We expect your signature by tomorrow. He hung up the phone. The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back onto the cradle. The walls of my office felt tight, and the weight of their betrayal was heavy, but I did not feel defeated. I felt a cold, sharp clarity taking over my entire mind. They thought they had cut off my air supply. They thought I was just a grieving widow who would crumble under the threat of poverty and public shame. I neatly stacked the legal documents on the edge of my desk. I pulled out my corporate secure phone, leaving my frozen personal accounts exactly as they were. Wow. The game had escalated beyond simple family drama. This was now a war of survival. I gathered my things and prepared to leave the office through the private exit. I needed to go back to the mansion and prepare for the night ahead. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew I could not make my next move during the day, while they were watching my every step. I drove home in absolute silence, waiting for the cover of darkness to fall. I did not know that a knock on my door at 2:00 in the morning would soon hand me the exact key I needed to destroy them all. The rain began to fall shortly after midnight, pounding relentlessly against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of Clear's Throat, my living room. I was wide awake, sitting alone in the dark, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, and staring at the faint shadows dancing across the hardwood floor. The digital clock on the kitchen oven glowed a harsh green, reading exactly 2 in the morning. My mind was racing, analyzing every possible legal maneuver my corporate lawyers could deploy at dawn to fight the injunction. The sudden sharp buzzing of the front gate intercom shattered the dead silence of the empty house, making me jump. I walked over and checked the security tablet mounted on the wall. Through the grainy night vision camera, I saw a solitary figure standing in the torrential downpour. It was DeAndre. He was drenched to the bone, shivering in a light jacket, and clutching a dark canvas duffel bag tightly to his chest. I did not hesitate for even a second. I pressed the button to unlock the heavy iron gate and walked quickly to the front door, pulling it open just as he reached the covered porch. He stepped into the warm, brightly lit foyer, leaving a heavy trail of rainwater across the imported marble tiles. He looked completely shattered. The strong, proud man who managed a high-end restaurant and worked relentlessly to provide for his family was entirely gone. In his place stood a hollowed-out shell of a human being. His eyes were red and severely swollen, carrying the unmistakable weight of profound betrayal. He dropped the wet duffel bag onto the floor with a heavy thud. It contained his entire life, packed hurriedly in the middle of the night. I brought him a dry towel and poured him a tall glass of bourbon. We sat across from each other at the massive quartz kitchen island in complete silence for a very long time. The sound of the violent thunderstorm outside perfectly mirrored the emotional chaos raging within both of us. We were two innocent people drowning in two very different kinds of grief. I was deeply mourning the sudden tragic death of the man I loved, while he was mourning the sudden violent death of the life he thought he had. I could not stay in that house, Audra. He finally whispered, his voice raspy and totally exhausted. She was sleeping soundly in the master bedroom, like she had not just destroyed everything we built. I packed my bag and left. But before I walked out the front door, I did something I have never done before in my entire life. I violated her privacy. He reached into his damp jacket pocket and pulled out his smartphone, placing it flat on the pristine white counter. He slid the glowing phone across the smooth surface toward me. "I know Sierra better than anyone else does," DeAndre explained, staring blankly at the glass of amber liquid in his shaking hands. I knew she was hiding something else beneath her public tears. She always uses the exact same password for everything, so I logged into her iCloud account from my laptop. I bypassed her security and went straight to her recently deleted messages folder. She thought she wiped the evidence completely clean, but she is not nearly as smart as she thinks she is. I picked up the phone and began reading the recovered text messages between Sierra and her two closest friends. The timestamp on the first conversation was from 3 weeks ago, just 2 days after my husband suffered his fatal aneurysm. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot as I read my sister's words. Sierra had not confessed to an affair out of overwhelming guilt or a desire for the truth. She had meticulously orchestrated a hostile financial takeover. The text messages detailed her exact legal strategy step by step. She told her friends she desperately needed a massive payout to escape her hidden credit card debt before her creditors sued her. She explicitly stated that Nathaniel being dead was the perfect opportunity because a corpse cannot request a paternity test. She outlined her entire plan to forge the will and ambush me at the birthday party specifically to maximize public humiliation and force a quick financial settlement out of court. They were laughing about it, Audra, DeAndre said, his voice breaking slightly before hardening into pure, unfiltered anger. They were making sick jokes about how rich she was going to be once you surrendered the property. She used a dead man to secure a payday, and she used my innocent son as the ultimate bargaining chip. I kept scrolling through the damning messages. The sheer calculated malice was genuinely breathtaking. But there was another deeper layer to the conversation that immediately caught my attention. In one text, her friend asked if Sierra was worried about a court-ordered DNA test exposing the lie. Sierra responded with a laughing, crying emoji, and typed out that she would simply refuse the test to protect her baby from trauma until I signed the house over. because by then, it would not matter who the father was. I set the phone down gently and looked directly at DeAndre. He met my gaze with a fierce, unwavering intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I already know Lucas is not my biological son. DeAndre stated, his tone dangerously calm and terrifyingly steady. I have had my suspicions for several months because the timeline of her pregnancy never fully made sense. But I ignored all the glaring red flags because I loved that little boy unconditionally. But reading those deleted messages tonight confirmed something else for me. I am absolutely certain the boy is not Nathaniel Child either. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the counter. She is far too sloppy, Audra. She is far too desperate. She picked your husband because he was incredibly wealthy, and because he was permanently gone. She fabricated this entire narrative out of thin air to steal your assets. We just need to find out who the real father is to blow her story completely out of the water. The air in the kitchen suddenly shifted. The heavy, suffocating pressure of my parents' extortion and the vicious public smear campaign suddenly felt completely irrelevant. I was no longer a helpless victim waiting for the next legal blow to land. I had a credible witness. I had concrete digital evidence of premeditated financial fraud. And most importantly, I had an ally who was just as intensely motivated to see Sierra face the brutal consequences of her monstrous greed. I looked at the exhausted man sitting across from me. He had lost his marriage, his home, and the child he thought was his own, all in the brutal span of 48 hours. Sierra and my parents had vastly underestimated the massive collateral damage of their greedy scheme. They assumed DeAndre would just disappear quietly into the background, too ashamed of his wife's public infidelity to ever fight back. They assumed I would simply crumble under the suffocating weight of an aggressive legal injunction and social media hate. They were completely, entirely wrong. I reached out and placed my hand firmly over his. We did not need to sign a legal contract. We did not need to make any grand dramatic declarations. In the quiet darkness of the early morning, surrounded by the relentless pounding of the rain, we formed a silent, ironclad pact. We were going to dismantle their arrogant lives piece by piece. We were going to expose every single lie, every forged document, and every ounce of illegal extortion to the harsh, unyielding light of day. They wanted to wage a war over an 8 million estate. We were going to give them an absolute massacre. Tomorrow morning, we start digging. I told him, my voice turning cold and perfectly steady. You can stay in the guest house for as long as you need to, but right now we need to plan our next move. They think they have me backed into an inescapable corner with frozen bank accounts and a fake lawsuit. But I have a secret of my own, DeAndre. A major medical secret about Nathaniel that Sierra could not possibly have known when she picked him as her target. DeAndre looked up, his dark eyes sharpening with intense, renewed focus. He nodded slowly, bracing himself for the fight ahead. Let us burn their house down, he said. DeAndre did not just bring deleted text messages to my house that night. He reached down into his damp duffel bag and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, smoothing it flat against the quartz countertop. It was a digital receipt from a highly reputable private genetics laboratory. I looked at the receipt and then back up at his exhausted face, trying to comprehend what he had done in the frantic moments before fleeing his broken home. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling heavily, as he explained his final move before walking out on Sierra forever. Before I left the house, I went into the nursery, DeAndre said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas was fast asleep in his crib, hugging that little stuffed bear I bought him for his birthday. It broke my heart into a million pieces, Audra. It took every ounce of strength I had not to just break down and cry right there in the dark. But I knew I could not leave without securing the absolute truth. I used a sterile cotton swab from the bathroom, and I took a DNA sample from the inside of his cheek. He tapped the digital receipt on the counter with a heavy finger. I packed the sample, sealed it perfectly, and dropped it into a priority overnight shipping box at the 24-hour post office on my way here. I paid for the most expensive expedited testing they offer. They will compare his DNA to mine and run it through a massive global ancestry database. In less than 72 hours, I will have legally admissible proof that the boy is not mine, and we might just find out who the real father actually is. I stared at him in complete awe in the absolute worst moment of his entire life, while his heart was actively being ripped out of his chest. DeAndre had the profound mental clarity to secure biological evidence. He was not just a victim crying in the dark. He was a man meticulously building an airtight legal case against the woman who destroyed him. His proactive brilliance gave me the final push I needed. It was time to hand him the missing piece of the puzzle. It was time to reveal the secret I had been guarding fiercely since the day I married Nathaniel. I stood up from the kitchen stool, without saying a word, and walked down the long dark hallway toward my private study. I approached the heavy steel floor safe hidden behind a bookshelf in the corner of the room. I typed in the secure passcode, turning the heavy metal dial until it clicked open. I reached into the very back of the safe, bypassing my corporate documents and luxury real estate deeds. I pulled out a single thin manila folder. It was old, its edges slightly frayed from years of being carefully hidden away. I walked back into the kitchen and dropped the folder right on top of DeAndre's digital laboratory receipt. He looked at the blank cover and then looked up at me with a confused expression. "You are about to pay a lot of money to a genetics lab to prove that Nathaniel is not the father of your wife. Baby," I said, my voice completely steady. "But you do not need to do that, DeAndre. I can save you the anxiety of wondering if my husband ever betrayed you. I already know for an absolute medical fact that Sierra is lying." I opened the folder and slid the top document toward him. It was a certified medical report from a prominent fertility specialist, heavily stamped and signed by 3 different physicians. When Nathaniel was 18 years old, he contracted a terrifyingly severe case of the MS. I explained, watching DeAndre's eyes scan the dense medical terminology. It was so bad he was hospitalized for over a week with a dangerously high fever. The virus caused massive internal complications. It completely permanently destroyed his reproductive system. Before we even got engaged, Nathaniel sat me down and cried for hours. He told me he was diagnosed as 100% irreversibly sterile. He could never biologically father a child. DeAndre froze. He stopped breathing for a solid 5 seconds. He read the highlighted conclusion at the bottom of the medical document and then read it a second time, just to make sure his exhausted mind was not playing tricks on him. The paper clearly stated 0 viable sperm count and permanent untreatable sterility. We never told a single living soul. I continued, leaning closer to him. "You know how my parents are. My father, Harrison, is obsessed with bloodlines and legacy, and leaving a mark on the world. My mother, Brenda, would have endlessly gossiped about it at her country club brunches. They would have constantly belittled Nathaniel and treated him like he was less of a man just because he could not give them a biological grandchild. We wanted to protect our peace, so we buried the medical records and simply told everyone we were focusing on our careers instead of having kids." DeAndre slowly pushed the file back toward me. A dark, incredibly satisfying smile began to form on his face, replacing the hollow devastation that had consumed him just an hour ago. "She did not know," he whispered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Sierra had absolutely no idea. She just picked Nathaniel because he was a wealthy, successful man who happened to die suddenly. 3. She figured a dead man could not demand a paternity test. She saw your $8 million estate sitting there and assumed she could just fabricate a scandalous affair to extort you. She built an entire legal strategy on a biological impossibility." "Exactly," I replied, feeling the cold rush of absolute victory coursing through my veins. "Sierra forged a legal will and filed a hostile injunction to claim an inheritance for a baby that physically cannot exist. She has committed multiple felonies based on a lie that we can instantly destroy with 1 piece of paper from this folder. We could go to the police right now and end this entire charade by sunrise. But we are not going to do that," DeAndre stated, his eyes narrowing with a dangerous predatory focus. If we show our hand right now, she will just claim it was a desperate mistake. She will play the victim again and say she was just confused about who the father was. Your parents will probably hire her a massive legal team to plead temporary insanity and protect their precious golden child from going to prison. We cannot let them off the hook that easily, Audra. We cannot just win the battle. We have to completely annihilate them. He was absolutely right. Sierra was a master manipulator, and my parents were her willing accomplices. If we gave them any room to pivot, they would find a way to wriggle out of the consequences. We needed to corner them completely with no avenue of escape. So what is our strategy? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We wait, DeAndre said, his voice hardening into solid steel. We let your parents continue their vicious smear campaign. We let Sierra go on social media and collect thousands of dollars in fraudulent donations. We let them think they have you completely trapped with their legal injunction. We let them get so wildly arrogant and so deeply committed to this massive fraud that there is no turning back. And we wait for my expedited DNA results to come back from the laboratory. I nodded slowly, locking the medical files securely back inside the manila folder. Because once we know the true identity of the real biological father, I added, we will not just be exposing a lie. We will be burning their entire reality to the ground. We will invite them all to a glorious celebration of their supposed victory, and we will execute them in front of an audience. The midnight storm continued to rage outside our windows, but inside that kitchen, the atmosphere had completely shifted. We were no longer grieving victims hiding in the dark. We were the architects of their absolute ruin. The next morning arrived with a glaring sunlight that perfectly matched my state of mind. I drove to the corporate office of Aura Staging LLC with my spine perfectly straight and my emotions completely locked away. DeAndre was hidden in my guest house, working on his legal maneuvers, while I had a multi-million-dollar business to run. I walked past the remaining protesters outside my building, without even blinking, at their handmade cardboard signs. They were just noisy background extras, in a movie they did not realize was already over. I took the private elevator up to my floor and settled into my leather chair, ready to finalize the interior design contracts for a massive new high-rise development downtown. I was sipping my black coffee and reviewing a digital rendering when the heavy glass doors of my corporate suite suddenly and violently swung open. My receptionist let out a startled gasp as two very familiar figures completely bypassed her security desk, ignoring her protests, and stormed directly into my private office. It was my father, Harrison, and my mother, Brenda. They looked furious. They had clearly spent the entire morning fuming over my refusal to immediately surrender to their aggressive legal tactics and the frozen bank accounts. Harrison did not even bother to say hello. He marched straight up to my workspace and slammed his hands down hard on the pristine surface of my mahogany desk, scattering my neatly organized architectural blueprints onto the hardwood floor. Brenda stood right behind him, clutching her expensive designer handbag and glaring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are making a massive mistake, Audra," my father growled, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "We gave you 24 hours to review the paperwork and sign the deed over to Sierra. I just got off the phone with our lawyers, and they told me you have not even contacted them to arrange a settlement. You are deliberately stalling and playing games with your sister's livelihood." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply took another slow sip of my coffee and looked at them as if they were two unruly toddlers throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "I am not playing games, Dad," I replied, my voice as smooth and cold as a sheet of ice. "I am simply refusing to hand over an $8 million asset to a woman who has spent her entire life stealing from me while you both cheered her on." My mother let out a dramatic gasp, pressing a hand to her chest, as if she had just been physically struck. "How dare you speak about your sister that way?" Brenda shrieked, taking a step forward. "Sierra is a grieving mother trying to protect Nathaniel innocent child from your vicious greed. She has never stolen a single thing from you in her entire life. You have always been insanely jealous of her, and now you are projecting your own bitter flaws onto her." I set my coffee mug down on the desk. The sheer delusional audacity of her statement was almost impressive. They had rewritten our entire family history to paint Sierra as a flawless angel, and me as the cold, wealthy villain. But I was done playing along with their twisted narrative. I decided it was time to rip the bandages off some very old and deeply infected wounds. Never stolen a single thing from me, I repeated slowly, leaning back in my leather chair and resting my hands in my lap. Let us take a quick trip down memory lane, Mother. Do you remember when Sierra was 24 years old and facing complete financial ruin because she maxed out 5 different credit cards on luxury vacations and designer clothes? Do you remember how she came crying to you and Dad because her creditors were threatening to sue her and garnish her wages? My parents completely froze. They had not expected me to bring up the past. They always demanded that we sweep Sierra failures under the rug and never speak of them again. You both cornered me in this exact office, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You told me that, because my staging business was finally becoming profitable, it was my family duty to protect my younger sister. You literally forced me to hand over $30,000 of my own hard-earned savings to pay off her massive debt. You promised me she would pay me back every single month. It has been 6 years and I have not seen a single dime. But I did not say a word because I was the good, responsible daughter. I absorbed the massive financial hit so she could keep living her fantasy life. Harrison stood up slightly straighter, trying to regain control of the room. That was different, he snapped, waving his hand dismissively. That was a family loan to help her get back on her feet. You had plenty of money to spare, Audra. You are bringing up ancient history just to deflect from the fact that you are currently trying to make her and her baby homeless. I smiled, a completely dead expression that did not reach my eyes. It is not ancient history, Dad, I replied smoothly. It is a very well documented pattern of theft, because 3 years after I paid off her debt, she decided she suddenly wanted to be a high-end interior designer, just like me. Do you remember how she magically landed that prestigious downtown firm job with 0 training? She got that job because she sneaked into my apartment and stole my entire college design portfolio. She literally presented my original grueling hard work as her own. When I confronted you both, you told me to let her have the victory. Brenda slammed her hand down. You are selfish for hoarding wealth, Audra. Surrender the house immediately. I remained stone cold. I looked at her hand resting on my desk, her perfectly manicured nails tapping frantically against the polished wood. You are fundamentally misunderstanding the reality of this situation, Mother, I said, leaning forward slightly, so my voice would carry the exact weight of my authority. I am not hoarding wealth. I am protecting my legally acquired assets from a family of highly predictable parasites. Brenda's mouth fell open in sheer outrage. But before she could formulate another hysterical scream, my father completely lost what little restraint he had left. Harrison had never been a man who could handle being told no by a woman, especially not by the daughter he had spent his entire life trying to control. He took a massive step forward, completely invading my personal space. He leaned his heavy frame directly over my mahogany desk, planting both of his hands firmly on top of my architectural blueprints. His face was dangerously close to mine, and I could smell the stale coffee on his breath, masking a desperate panic. You listen to me very carefully, Audra, he growled, his voice dropping into a vicious, threatening register that I had not heard since I was a terrified teenager living under his roof. We are completely done playing this little corporate boss game with you. You think you are completely untouchable because you sit in this fancy corner office and wear expensive tailored suits. But you forget who raised you. You forget that I know exactly how this luxury real estate industry works. It is entirely built on reputation and public image. I maintained absolute eye contact with him. I did not shrink back into my leather chair. I did not blink. I just let him keep talking, knowing perfectly well that angry, arrogant men always talk far too much when they think they have the upper hand. I have spent the entire morning doing some very interesting research, Harrison continued, a sickeningly triumphant smirk spreading across his reining face. I know exactly who your biggest corporate clients are right now. I know you are finalizing a massive interior design contract with the Vanguard Development Group for those new downtown penthouses. I know you are staging 3 different properties for Elite Horizon Reality. Those contracts are worth millions of dollars in continuous revenue for your little company. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the heavy air of the office. He thought he had just played a brilliant winning card. And what exactly does my corporate client list have to do with Sierra's fraudulent claim to my house? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and dangerously calm. It has everything to do with it. Brenda snapped from behind him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Your father is trying to explain to you that your entire business is hanging by a single thread, and we are holding the scissors. Harrison nodded aggressively, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. If you do not contact our lawyers and sign the deed to that $8 million house over to Sierra by 5 o'clock this evening, I am going to make some phone calls. I am going to personally contact the CEO of Vanguard Development and the board members of Elite Horizon. I am going to tell them that the woman they are doing business with is a morally bankrupt monster who is intentionally throwing her dead husband, infant son, out onto the streets. He leaned in even closer, his voice dripping with pure malice. I will send them the link to Sierra GoFundMe page. I will show them the videos of the angry protesters swarming the pavement right outside this very building. I will make absolutely sure they know that associating with Aura Staging LLC is a massive public relations disaster. We will drag your name through the mud so thoroughly that you will never stage a single closet in this city ever again. We will bankrupt you, Audra. We will completely destroy your entire life. I let his threat echo in the silent office. I needed to be absolutely certain the parameters of his threat were crystal clear for the permanent record. Let me make sure I am understanding your terms correctly, Dad, I said, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap. You are explicitly stating that unless I surrender an $8 million piece of real estate to you and Sierra, you are going to intentionally sabotage my corporate contracts to cause me massive financial ruin. You are threatening to destroy my business unless I give you my property. Yes, Harrison barked, slamming his fist down on the desk. That is exactly what I am saying. You sign the house over to your sister today or you lose your company tomorrow. You have absolutely no other choice. We are not leaving this office until you pick up that phone and call the lawyers to finalize the transfer. Brenda nodded in furious agreement. We are doing this for your own good. Audra, you forced our hand. This is the only way to save the family and get Lucas the inheritance he deserves. I looked at my parents. They looked so incredibly proud of themselves. They truly believed they had just executed a flawless checkmate. They thought they had cornered the helpless widow. But they had completely forgotten that I had spent the last decade navigating the vicious cutthroat world of luxury corporate real estate. I did not survive in this industry by being easily intimidated. I slowly uncrossed my legs and reached my right hand underneath the thick wooden lip of my desk. My fingers found the small concealed plastic button installed directly beneath my keyboard tray. It was a silent panic alarm connected directly to the building armed security team in the main lobby. I pressed it firmly twice, holding it down on the second press to signal a hostile physical threat in the executive suite. Then I casually brought my hand back up to the surface of my desk. I reached over toward a stack of architectural blueprints and moved the top paper aside. Hidden perfectly underneath the blueprint was my secondary corporate smartphone. The screen was dark, but the microphone was fully active. I tapped the screen once to wake it up and deliberately pressed the large red square on the voice memo application. The digital counter stopped at exactly 14 minutes and 32 seconds. What are you doing? Harrison demanded, his triumphant smirk faltering slightly as he watched my completely unbothered movements. Who are you calling? I told you to call the lawyers, not play on your phone. I am not calling anyone, Dad, I replied, picking up the device and holding it up so the bright screen was clearly visible to both of them. I just wanted to make sure I safely stopped the audio recording before the file got too large to easily email. I have been recording this entire interaction since the moment you bypassed my receptionist and forced your way into my private office. The color instantly drained from Harrison's face. Brenda let out a strangled gasp, taking a rapid step backward, as if the small rectangular device in my hand was a live grenade. I smiled, a genuine chilling smile that finally reached my eyes. I looked directly at my father, who was suddenly frozen in complete terror. "You see, Dad, what you just did is not a clever family negotiation," I explained, my voice echoing with absolute authority in the quiet room. "Threatening to intentionally destroy someone's business and ruin their financial livelihood unless they surrender a highly valuable financial asset is not a legal strategy. It is the textbook definition of felony extortion. It is a severe criminal offense, punishable by several years in a state penitentiary." "You are bluffing," Harrison stammered, his loud, aggressive voice suddenly shrinking into a pathetic, breathless whisper. "You would never send your own parents to jail. You would not dare do that to us." I tapped the screen, hitting the save icon, and instantly backing the audio file up to my secure cloud server. "Try me," I whispered, leaning forward. "You came into my territory. You threatened my livelihood. You tried to use my dead husband's memory as a weapon to steal from me. I will not hesitate to hand this recording directly to the district attorney if you ever threaten me again." The heavy glass doors of my office suddenly swung open again. 3 large, heavily armed security guards from the building lobby stepped into the room. They completely surrounded my parents, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. "Is there a problem here, Miss Audra?" the lead security officer asked, his eyes locked entirely on Harrison. "Yes," I replied smoothly, picking up my coffee mug and taking a long, relaxed sip. "These 2 individuals were just leaving. They are permanently banned from the premises. If they ever step foot in this building, or on the plaza outside again, I want them immediately arrested for criminal trespassing." Harrison opened his mouth to argue, but the lead guard stepped firmly into his path, leaving him absolutely no room to move except toward the door. Brenda was already practically running out of the office, covering her face with her designer handbag in total humiliation. My father looked back at me one last time, his eyes wide with a brand new, terrifying realization. He finally understood that I was not the victim in the story anymore. I was the predator, and I was just getting started. I watched through the glass walls of my office as the security team escorted my utterly defeated parents toward the elevator bank. My father did not look back. My mother was practically hyperventilating into her designer handbag. Once the elevator doors slid shut, I walked back to my desk and picked up the thick manila envelope containing the injunction and the supposed will Sierra had filed with the probate court. I slid the documents into my leather briefcase. I had successfully neutralized my parents and secured undeniable proof of their extortion. But they were only the desperate accomplices. The real architect of this massive financial fraud was my sister, and it was time to tear her primary weapon completely apart. I left the building through the private executive garage and drove straight to the downtown high-rise that housed my corporate legal team. I did not use a standard family lawyer for my business. I retained a high-powered corporate litigation firm that specialized in hostile takeovers and contract law. The senior partner, Marcus, was a brilliant, ruthless attorney who had helped me navigate the vicious luxury real estate market for the past 7 years. He did not deal in emotions or family drama. He dealt exclusively in cold, hard, verifiable facts. I bypassed the reception desk and walked directly into his spacious corner office, dropping the manila envelope onto his pristine glass conference table. Marcus looked up from his laptop, adjusting his silver-framed glasses. He took one look at my face and immediately closed his computer, knowing this was not a routine contract review. "I need you to completely dismantle a legal document," I said, pulling the copy of the filed will from the envelope and sliding it across the glass. "My sister filed this with the probate court yesterday. She is claiming Nathaniel left her half of my estate to support a child she claims is his." Marcus picked up the document. He did not ask how I was feeling or offer meaningless condolences. He immediately shifted into analytical mode. He scanned the first page, his eyes darting quickly across the text. Within 30 seconds, he let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. "Audra, this document is an absolute joke," Marcus stated, flattening the paper on the table. "The formatting is completely inconsistent. The margins shift drastically between page 1 and page 2. The legal terminology used in the third paragraph contradicts the jurisdiction clause in the fifth paragraph. Whoever drafted this did not go to law school. They downloaded a cheap, generic legal template from the internet and hastily filled in the blanks. I know, I replied, taking a seat across from him. Nathaniel was a meticulous history teacher who obsessed over proper grammar and structure. He would have never signed something this sloppy. But the probate judge granted a temporary injunction based on this filing. Sierra managed to freeze my personal accounts and put a lien on the house. I need concrete, undeniable proof that this document is a complete fabrication before the probate hearing. Marcus nodded slowly. He picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. Within 2 minutes, a younger man wearing a dark suit walked into the office. This was David, the firm digital forensic specialist. David spent his days analyzing forged corporate contracts and fraudulent digital signatures for multi-million-dollar lawsuits. David Marcus commanded, handing the document to him. I need a full forensic analysis on this signature and the document metadata. It was filed electronically with the probate court yesterday afternoon. Pull the original digital submission from the county database and tell me exactly how it was constructed. David took the document and left the room without a word. For the next hour, Marcus and I reviewed my corporate accounts, ensuring that Aura Staging LLC was completely insulated from the personal freeze. Sierra thought she had cut off my money, but she had only frozen my personal checking account. My corporate wealth remained entirely untouched and fully accessible. An hour later, David returned to the office carrying a sleek silver tablet. My mother doesn't want you here. My husband said it so quietly that no one around us noticed. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and delivered the sentence that would end our 22-year marriage. You're an embarrassment. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd misheard him. The late afternoon sun reflected off the white marble entrance of the Dallas Country Club, where my sister-in-law Lauren's wedding was about to begin. Guests in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos flowed past us, laughing as a string quartet played Zozer inside. I wasn't standing in front of the ballroom because I was late. I was standing there because security wouldn't let me enter. My name isn't on the guest list, ma'am. The young security guard had apologized. There must be some mistake. I smiled politely. I'm sure there is. I had expected Ethan to fix everything with one sentence. Instead, he became the mistake. My mother doesn't want you there, he repeated, adjusting the cufflinks I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary. Why? His jaw tightened. She thinks you'll make people uncomfortable. I've barely spoken to anyone in months. That's not the point. Then what is? He sighed as though I were the difficult one. Victoria, you're an embarrassment. The words landed harder than any scream ever could. Not because they were loud, because they were calm, calculated, final. I stared at the man I'd loved since I was 23 years old. The man whose first business proposal I'd rewritten overnight, because he was too nervous to present it. The man whose father I'd quietly helped refinance after the family nearly lost everything during the recession. The man whose entire family believed he was their hero. He couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. Behind him, I saw my mother-in-law Eleanor greeting guests beneath an enormous arch of white roses. She looked radiant, proud, happy. Why wouldn't she? Just 3 days earlier, I'd bought her dream house, an $8.8 million waterfront mansion in Naples, Florida. She thought Ethan had paid for it. Everyone did. No one knew the money had come from me. I never corrected them. That had always been my mistake. I see, I finally said. Ethan looked relieved. I knew you'd understand. No, I understood something entirely different. I pulled out my phone. He watched me carefully. What are you doing? Replying. I opened our text conversation and typed one word. Understood. I pressed send. Then I looked up and smiled. I hope Lauren has a beautiful wedding. Without waiting for another word, I turned around and walked toward the parking lot. I didn't cry, not yet. The valet brought my black Mercedes around within minutes. As I settled into the driver's seat, I finally allowed myself one long breath. 22 years gone, not because of another woman, not because of money, not because we'd stopped loving each other, because somewhere along the way, my husband had stopped respecting me. Those are two very different things. Love survives arguments, respect survives silence. Once respect dies, everything else eventually follows. I started the engine but didn't drive away. Instead, I sat there watching guests arrive. Families posing for photographs, grandparents hugging grandchildren, little girls carrying flower baskets. It looked like every perfect American wedding I'd ever attended. Except today, I wasn't family. At least that's what Eleanor wanted everyone to believe. The irony almost made me laugh. Because if anyone there truly knew how much of that wedding had been paid for by me, the entire evening would stop. The flowers, the orchestra, the imported champagne, even Lauren's honeymoon villa in Tuscany. Every invoice had quietly crossed my desk months ago. Eleanor had thanked Ethan repeatedly for his generosity. He accepted every compliment. He never corrected her. At first, I thought he was simply avoiding awkward conversations. Over time, avoidance became habit. Habit became expectation. Expectation became entitlement, and entitlement eventually becomes cruelty. My phone buzzed. It was my executive assistant, Megan. Mrs. Bennett, hi Megan. You sound different, I probably do. Everything okay? I looked back toward the ballroom. No. She stayed quiet. One reason Megan had worked beside me for 15 years was because she knew when silence mattered more than questions. Finally, she asked softly, "What do you need?" I smiled. Exactly the right question. Not, "What happened?" Not, "Are you okay?" Simply, "What do you need?" "I need the number for Daniel." She didn't hesitate. "I'll text it now." Within seconds, my phone vibrated again. Daniel Brooks, senior partner, Brooks and Ellison Estate Attorneys, the man who had spent nearly 2 decades helping structure my businesses, trusts, charitable foundations, and asset protection plans. The man who understood one important fact. Almost everything the Bennett family enjoyed legally depended on me. Not Ethan, not Eleanor. Me. I looked at the number for nearly a minute. Then I locked my phone again. No, not yet. Anger makes expensive decisions. I had built my career by never acting while emotional. If I was going to change the course of my life, I would do it calmly, methodically, professionally. Exactly the way I'd built my fortune. I drove aimlessly through Dallas, past Highland Park, past the office tower where my investment company occupied the top 3 floors, past restaurants where Ethan and I used to celebrate anniversaries, and our every street carried memories. Every memory suddenly felt borrowed. At a red light, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. People rarely show you who they are during hard times. They show you during easy ones. Life had become too comfortable for Ethan. He'd forgotten who made that comfort possible. Maybe I'd helped him forget. The light turned green. I kept driving. 48 minutes had passed since I left the country club, then 53, then 58. I finally pulled into an empty overlook beside White Rock Lake. The water reflected the orange glow of sunset. Beautiful, peaceful. Nothing like the storm quietly building inside me. My phone read exactly 1 hour since I had texted Ethan. Understood. I unlocked the screen, scrolled to Daniel Brooks, pressed call. He answered before the second ring. "Victoria, it's me. I thought you'd be at the wedding." I was. A pause. "That doesn't sound good." "It isn't." His voice became instantly professional. "What would you like me to do?" I looked across the lake. For the first time all afternoon, I smiled. "Daniel, I think it's time we review every financial arrangement connected to the Bennett family." There was complete silence. Then he quietly replied, "I'll meet you at the office within 30 minutes. I ended the call. The sun dipped below the horizon. Some endings arrive with fireworks. Mine arrived with one calm sentence and one phone call. The Bennett family had no idea that while they were raising champagne glasses inside the ballroom, the foundation beneath everything they believed they owned had just begun to shift. Daniel was already waiting when I arrived. It was nearly 8 in the evening, yet every light on the 26th floor of my headquarters remained on. My executive team had no idea why I had called an emergency meeting with my attorney after business hours. They only knew that if I requested privacy, I usually had a very good reason. Daniel stood as I entered the conference room. He had been my attorney for almost 19 years. More importantly, he had become one of the few people who knew the complete truth about my marriage. "May, He studied my face for several seconds before speaking. What happened? My husband called me in embarrassment. Daniel slowly removed his glasses. I'm sorry, so am I. Was that all? I laughed softly. No. I placed my phone on the conference table and slid it toward him. He read Ethan's final text. My mother doesn't want you there. You're an embarrassment. Daniel looked back at me. After everything you've done for them? I know. He remained silent. There wasn't much left to say. Sometimes facts speak louder than outrage. 22 years earlier, I had met Ethan Bennett at a commercial real estate conference in Houston. He was charming, confident, funny. He came from what everyone believed was one of Dallas's most respected old money families. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of 2 factory workers who had died within months of each other when I was 16. After bouncing between relatives and foster care, I put myself through college on scholarships, part-time jobs, and sheer stubbornness. By 30, I had built a small but growing investment company, specializing in distressed commercial properties. I wasn't glamorous. I simply worked harder than almost everyone else. Ethan admired that. At least I believed he did. We married 3 years later. During our honeymoon, I learned my first secret about the Bennett family. They weren't wealthy. They only looked wealthy. Their country club memberships, luxury cars, vacation homes, private schools. Everything depended on refinancing old debt with new debt. They had perfected the appearance of success. Behind closed doors, the numbers were terrifying. One evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his head buried in his hands. My father borrowed against everything. How bad is it? Worse than anyone knows. Does your mother know? She refuses to believe it. He looked completely defeated. I don't know how to save them. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out. Back then, I still believed we meant exactly that together. SUBTHANANDMYOFAND. Within 6 months, I quietly arranged financing through one of my investment partnerships. The Bennett family's manufacturing company survived. No one outside the boardroom ever knew why. Ethan thanked me over dinner. You saved my family. We saved them. He smiled. I couldn't have done it without you. I believed him. At the time, he believed it too. The years passed. My company expanded into Texas, Arizona, Florida, and Colorado, then California, then Tennessee. Every acquisition strengthened our portfolio. Every successful deal generated more income than the last. Eventually, money stopped being something I chased. It became something I managed. That was around the time Eleanor's expectations began to change. At first, she only asked for little favors. Victoria, would you mind helping Lauren with her student loans? Of course. Ethan mentioned you understand investments. Could you look over this property? Absolutely. My friend is opening a restaurant. No problem. Every request sounded temporary, reasonable. Family helping family. Then the requests became larger. Private school tuition, vacation homes, medical treatments, luxury cruises, investment capital, designer renovations. Every Christmas brought another expensive surprise someone expected Ethan to provide. Every Christmas, I quietly paid the bill. One afternoon, Eleanor hugged Ethan after he handed her the keys to a new Mercedes. My son always takes care of his mother. I stood 3 feet away. She never looked at me. Ethan smiled awkwardly. He said nothing. Driving home, I asked him gently, why didn't you tell her? He kept his eyes on the road. It makes her happy. It isn't true, I know. Then why? He sighed. You know how Mom is. I did. She loved appearances, status recognition, being admired. Correcting her in public would have embarrassed her, so I let it go again and again and again. Looking back, every silence taught her another dangerous lesson. She learned she could erase me, and I'd allow it. Daniel opened one of the folders he'd brought. You've personally funded 38 major purchases for the Bennett family. I stopped counting. I didn't. He slid several pages toward me. There they were. Property acquisitions, trust contributions, private loans, business guarantees, medical expenses, tuition payments, charitable donations made in Eleanor's name. Nearly every milestone the Bennett family celebrated over the past 2 decades had one thing in common. My signature, not Ethan's, mine. Daniel looked at me carefully. Do you remember what I asked you when we structured these agreements? I nodded. You asked if I was protecting myself. And what did you say? I said I trusted my husband. And I told you trust and documentation should never replace each other. He wasn't criticizing me, he was reminding me. Everything had been documented. Every transfer, every guarantee, every legal obligation. The Bennett family simply never bothered reading the paperwork. They assumed Ethan handled everything. Ironically, Ethan assumed I always would. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas. The city lights shimmered beneath the summer sky. Beautiful, busy, unaware that my entire life had changed in a single afternoon. I keep asking myself one question, I admitted. Daniel waited. When did he stop seeing me? He thought for a long moment. I don't think he stopped seeing you. I turned toward him. I think he stopped noticing the cost of everything you quietly carried. That sentence stayed with me. People often appreciate miracles until miracles become routine. Then they call them expectations. My phone vibrated. Ethan. Incoming call. I stared at the screen. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another call, then another, then Lauren, then Eleanor. I didn't answer any of them. Finally, a text arrived from Ethan. Where are you? Mom says the Naples closing has been delayed. The title company won't release the property. They say there's a problem with the funding. Can you call me? I read it twice. Interesting. The legal review hadn't even begun. Daniel noticed my expression. What is it? I handed him my phone. He smiled for the first time that evening. They're already feeling the first ripple. I looked down at the growing list of missed calls. For 22 years, whenever the Bennett family did something, they called me. Not because they loved me, because I solved problems. Tonight would be different. Tonight, for the very first time, their problems would have to wait. I slept for exactly 3 hours, not because I was anxious, because my mind had already made its decision. When you've spent your entire adult life making multi-million-dollar business decisions, you learn something important. The emotion belongs at home. Facts belong at the conference table. At 6:30 the next morning, I walked into my office carrying a cup of black coffee. Dallas was just waking up. My executive assistant Megan looked up from her desk. You've got a full schedule today. I know. She hesitated. And your husband has called 17 times. I figured. He also came by around 6 this morning. I stopped walking. He came here? He wanted to see you. What did you tell him? Exactly what you once told me to say. She smiled politely. Mrs. Bennett isn't available without an appointment. I couldn't help smiling. Thank you. I assumed you had your reasons. I do. At 8 sharp, Daniel entered the boardroom carrying 4 thick binders. Behind him came 2 senior attorneys. Then my chief financial officer, Robert, finally, my trust administrator, Melissa. Every person sitting around that table had signed confidentiality agreements years ago. They knew the truth about my financial structure. None of them had ever met Ethan socially. That had been intentional. I wanted my business and my marriage to remain separate. Ironically, that separation was about to save me. Daniel opened the meeting. Victoria has requested a complete legal review of every active financial arrangement benefiting the Bennett family. No one looked surprised. Professional people don't react with emotion. They react with questions. Robert adjusted his glasses. Are we discussing suspension or termination? Review first, I answered. Then action where appropriate. Melissa opened a spreadsheet. There are 37 active obligations. Walk me through them. She nodded. The Naples property scheduled to close tomorrow. $8.8 million. Correct. Currently sits inside a revocable family trust awaiting final authorization. Daniel looked toward me. That authorization requires your signature. I haven't signed. No, Robert continued. There are also 4 personal guarantees attached to Ethan's investment company. Any legal obligation requiring me to continue? He scanned several pages. No. What happens if they're withdrawn? The banks will request replacement collateral within 30 days, and if none exists, the loans become immediately callable. I leaned back quietly. Interesting. I hadn't realized Ethan had become that financially exposed. Not because I'd never cared, because I'd never imagined I'd need to know. Daniel folded his hands. Victoria. Yes, I need to ask something directly. I nodded. Are you trying to punish your husband? The room became silent. Everyone waited. I thought carefully before answering. No. Then what are you trying to accomplish? The truth. No one spoke. Finally, I continued. For 22 years, I've allowed everyone, including Ethan, to believe a version of reality that simply isn't true. Robert nodded slowly. I understand. I won't destroy anyone, I know, but I also won't continue financing people who publicly humiliate me. Daniel smiled slightly. That's a very different objective. It is. At exactly 9:42 a.m., Daniel drafted the first letter. It wasn't dramatic. No lawsuits, no threats, simply a formal notice. Pending review. Funding for the Naples property is temporarily suspended until further written authorization by the grantor. The grantor? Me. A second letter followed. The title company, a third. The escrow officer, a fourth. The estate planning bank. Everything happened according to contracts. Everyone had signed years earlier. Nothing illegal, nothing emotional, just paperwork. Funny how paperwork changes lives. ... Meanwhile, about 40 miles away, the Bennett family had gathered for a farewell brunch following Lauren's wedding. I didn't need to imagine it. Later, I would hear every detail. Lauren was opening gifts when Eleanor's phone rang. She answered cheerfully. Then her smile disappeared. What do you mean the closing has been suspended? Across the room, Ethan reportedly looked up. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Another 30 seconds passed. Then Eleanor's voice became louder. No, that's impossible. Guests turned to stare. The money is already there. Silence. Then, what authorization? She ended the call abruptly. Ethan. What? They're refusing to release the house. He frowned. What are you talking about? They say the funding hasn't been approved. He reportedly laughed. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. My wife handled everything. Exactly. I had at 10:15 my phone rang again. Ethan. This time I answered. His relief was immediate. Victoria, finally. Good morning. Something crazy is happening, so I've heard. The Naples closing has stopped. I know. They're saying they need your authorization. That's correct. Long silence. What do you mean? I mean exactly what they told you. I don't understand. I don't think you ever tried to. His breathing changed. Victoria, are you angry about yesterday? I looked out the window. What do you think? I'm sorry if I didn't mean you told me I was an embarrassment. I was upset. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice softened. My mother was emotional. So you agreed with her? I was trying to keep the peace. I almost laughed. Whose peace? Another silence. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Can you just call them and fix this? There it was. Not how are you, not are you okay, not can we talk? Simply fix it. I closed my eyes. Ethan. Yeah, do you know whose money bought that house? Mine. No. Silence. My company transferred the funds. He didn't respond. I personally established the trust. Nothing. I personally guaranteed the purchase. Still nothing. Finally. You're joking. I've never joked about business. He sounded genuinely confused. But everyone said I know. You never corrected us. No. Why? Because I believed protecting my husband's pride mattered. His breathing became heavier. You mean everything Eleanor thanked you for? I stopped. He finished the sentence himself. God was you. God, yes. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. 22 years of assumptions were collapsing inside his mind. Finally, he whispered, I didn't know. I believe you. Victoria, but not knowing stopped being an excuse yesterday. Around noon, Megan knocked gently. There's someone downstairs, Ethan. She nodded. He refuses to leave. I looked at Daniel. What do you recommend? He smiled. As your attorney? Yes. Don't avoid him forever. And as my friend? Make him wait. I smiled. For how long? He glanced at his watch. Long enough to understand what you've been waiting 22 years to receive? What? Respect. I stood and walked toward the elevator. Not to meet Ethan. Not yet. First, there was one more document waiting for my signature. The final suspension of every discretionary financial benefit connected to the Bennett family. I picked up the pen, signed my name, placed it back on the table. Outside my office window, the Dallas skyline looked exactly the same. Inside, everything had changed. By the time I finally agreed to see Ethan, he had been sitting in the reception area of my office for nearly 3 hours. Megan walked into my office and asked quietly, Are you ready? I looked at the clock. It was almost 4 in the afternoon. Yes. She nodded and returned a few minutes later. Ethan's here. I took a slow breath before stepping into the private conference room. He was standing beside the window with both hands in his pockets. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose. His eyes were bloodshot. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the confident Bennett everyone admired. He looked like a man who had just discovered his life wasn't what he thought it was. When he turned toward me, I barely recognized him. "You look tired," I said. "I didn't sleep." "I did." He gave a weak smile. "I guess one of us had to." Neither of us sat immediately. Finally he spoke. "I need you to explain what's happening." "I already did." "No." He shook his head. "I mean everything." I studied him for several seconds. Then I pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit." Daniel entered carrying 3 thick binders. Ethan frowned. "What are those?" "My records." Daniel placed them neatly on the table. "Mrs. Bennett asked me to prepare a complete financial history involving your family." Ethan looked confused. "Why?" "Because yesterday you told her she wasn't family." The room became silent. Daniel opened the first binder. "Let's start with 2008. Fadi." He slid a document across the table. "Your father's manufacturing company." Ethan glanced at it casually. Then his expression changed. "This loan was funded through Victoria's investment partnership." "I thought First National Bank." "They only serviced the loan." Daniel pointed to another page. "The capital came from her." Ethan slowly looked at me. "You never told me. You never asked." But the second binder opened. 2011, the lake house renovation. The contractor invoices, the architectural fees, the landscaping. Paid entirely by Victoria. Ethan rubbed his foot. I thought I know what you thought." Another page. 2013, Lauren's graduate school tuition. Another. 2015, your mother's heart surgery. Another. 2017, your father's tax settlement. Another. 2019, the Aspen vacation property. Another. 2021, the Family Charitable Foundation. Another. 2024, the Naples Mansion. Every page carried one familiar signature, mine. No dramatic music, no yelling, no accusations. Just 22 years of facts, one receipt after another, one canceled check after another, one wire confirmation after another. Eventually, Ethan stopped turning the pages. He simply stared at them, almost whispering. He asked, "Did my mother know?" "No." "My father?" "No." "Lauren?" "No." "Who knew?" "My attorneys, my accountants, my board, and you." He looked up. "I honestly believed I know." Just then Daniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. "It's Eleanor." Neither of us spoke. He looked toward me. "Should I answer?" I nodded. "Put her on speaker." He accepted the call. "Daniel Brooks." Her voice exploded through the room. "Where's Victoria?" "I'm here." There was a brief silence, then she spoke directly to me. "What are you doing?" "Reviewing my finances." "You've embarrassed this family." I almost smiled at the irony. "Really? You stopped the closing?" "Yes. My furniture is already there." "I know. The movers are waiting." "I know. My neighbors are expecting us." "I understand. You need to fix this immediately." "No." Silence. The kind that arrives when someone hears the word no for the first time. Finally, she asked, "What do you mean no?" "I mean the purchase has been suspended. You promised me that house." "I never promised you anything." "Ethan did." I glanced toward my husband. He lowered his head. "You paid for it. I considered it a gift. And you made it very clear yesterday that I'm an embarrassment." Her voice hardened. "This has nothing to do with yesterday." "It has everything to do with yesterday. You can't punish us over hurt feelings." "I agree." She sounded relieved. "So you'll restore the funding?" "No." Another long silence. "I'm protecting my dignity." Without waiting for her response, I nodded to Daniel. He ended the call. Ethan buried his face in his hands. "I can't believe this." "What part?" "My mother." "Or yourself?" He looked at me both. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he asked something I hadn't expected. "Were you ever going to tell me the truth?" He nodded. "I planned to." "When?" "The day you were proud of me instead of what I could quietly provide." His shoulders slumped. "I failed you." "You did." "I kept thinking I was protecting everyone." "No. You were protecting appearances." That evening, the family group chat exploded. Lauren demanded answers. Her husband wanted to know whether the Naples house was actually owned. Eleanor insisted there had been a banking mistake. Then my father-in-law Richard, who had always spoken the least, finally wrote one sentence. "Victoria, is any of this true?" I stared at the message. Richard had never treated me badly. Quiet, reserved, sometimes emotionally distant, but never cruel. I replied with a single photograph, one page from the original trust agreement. It showed my name, the funding source, The purchase amount, nothing more. 5 minutes later, Richard called. I answered. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Victoria? Yes. I spent 20 years believing my son rescued this family. I know. I'm ashamed. You don't need to apologize for believing what you were told. No. He sighed deeply. I need to apologize because I never bothered asking. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it. For the first time, someone inside that family wasn't defending themselves. They were accepting responsibility. The following morning, several Dallas business publications began reporting that the purchase of an $8 million Naples waterfront estate had been unexpectedly delayed. No names were released, only speculation. Inside my office, however, everyone already knew the truth. Not because I announced it, because reality has a way of revealing itself once people stop pretending. Late that afternoon, Daniel returned carrying one final folder. Everything has now been formally suspended. The discretionary trusts, the guarantees, the luxury property funding, the annual family distributions. He placed the folder in front of me. Nothing has been taken from them. He paused. They simply no longer have access to what was never actually theirs. I signed the final acknowledgement, closed the folder, and for the first time in 22 years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, not revenge, relief. Because carrying people who don't appreciate you is exhausting, and the moment you finally set the weight down, you realize how heavy it really was. The headlines disappeared within 2 days. The delayed mansion closing never became a public scandal. No television cameras showed up outside my office. No reporters camped in front of my house. Real wealth rarely creates loud drama. It creates quiet consequences. Those consequences began arriving one by one. A week after the wedding, Ethan called again. This time I answered immediately. Hello, can we meet? His voice sounded different. Gone was the confidence that had once made every conversation feel like a negotiation. Now he simply sounded tired. I'll meet you. When? Tomorrow morning. Where? Our favorite coffee shop. I thought about it. The little cafe in Highland Park had been part of our marriage since the beginning. We had celebrated my first commercial property purchase there. We had toasted when his father recovered from surgery. We had planned vacations over cinnamon rolls and black coffee. It felt strangely appropriate. 9. I'll be there. The next morning, Ethan was already waiting when I arrived. He stood as I walked in. For a second, instinct almost made me hug him. 22 years of habits don't disappear overnight. Instead, I shook his hand. His eyes briefly filled with sadness. I deserved that. Yes, we ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it. Finally, he spoke. I've spent the last week reading everything. What everything? The financial records, the trust agreements, the partnership documents, the guarantees. He looked down. I had no idea. I believe you. No, he shook his head. I mean, I had absolutely no idea how much you've done. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to add, he continued. My father spent 2 days going through old files and he cried. That surprised me. Richard Bennett wasn't an emotional man. I've seen him cry twice in my entire life. Ethan said quietly. The first time was when his brother died, and the second when he realized he'd spent 20 years thanking the wrong person. Huh. Ethan reached into his briefcase. I brought something. He slid a leather folder across the table. Inside was every credit card connected to family trusts, every access card, every account authorization, every signature stamp. I don't want any of it. You don't have to give it back. I'm not giving it back. He looked directly at me. I'm admitting it never belonged to me. For a long moment, I simply stared at him. This wasn't the Ethan I'd seen outside Lauren's wedding. This was the young man I'd married. Honest, humbled, afraid. Thank you, I said. He nodded. I should have said those words years ago. 2 days later, Richard asked if he could visit my office. When he arrived, he looked noticeably older than I remembered. He carried a small wooden box. I found these while cleaning my desk. Inside were dozens of handwritten thank you notes. Every birthday card I'd ever sent him. Christmas letters, family photographs. I never realized something. What? He smiled sadly. In every picture, he handed me one from Lauren's college graduation. I stood in the back row holding everyone's coats, making sure everyone had water, checking reservations on my phone, looking after everyone else. never once standing in the center. But you were always taking care of us. I was happy to. No. He shook his head gently. You convinced yourself you had to earn your place. His words struck a nerve I hadn't expected. Maybe he was right. Growing up without parents had taught me one dangerous lesson. If I wanted to be loved, I had to be useful. Somewhere along the way, usefulness had quietly replaced self-worth. 3 weeks later, I officially filed for divorce. The courthouse felt surprisingly ordinary. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no accusations, just signatures, paperwork, legal language. The judge looked over our agreement. Mrs. Bennett, are these terms acceptable to you? They are. Mr. Bennett? Yes, Your Honor. The divorce itself took less than 20 minutes. Walking back to the parking lot, Ethan stopped me. I know this won't change anything. It won't. I still need to say it. I waited. I'm sorry. For what? He looked toward the courthouse behind us. For confusing your generosity with obligation. For letting my mother define our marriage. For believing respect could wait until tomorrow. His voice cracked. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. I felt tears forming. Not because I wanted him back, because I knew he finally understood. Sometimes understanding arrives too late. Life kept moving. Without my financial support, the Bennett family had to make difficult decisions. Nothing catastrophic happened. No one became homeless. No one lost health care. No one went bankrupt. But the lifestyle changed. The Naples mansion was never purchased. The Aspen vacation property was sold. Luxury memberships were canceled. The chauffeur was dismissed. Private jets became commercial flights. Designer shopping trips became carefully planned budgets. For the first time in decades, the family began living on what they actually earned. Ironically, they discovered it was enough. Perhaps not enough for appearances, but enough for life. So, then came the biggest surprise of all. About 4 months after the divorce, I received a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. The handwriting belonged to Eleanor. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. It began simply, Victoria, for most of my life I confused being admired with being respected. I kept reading. She admitted she had enjoyed telling friends that her son had become so successful. She admitted she liked the attention, the compliments, the envy. She admitted something else. I convinced myself that if people knew the truth, they would think less of my family. Then came the sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. The truth is, I thought less of you because admitting what you'd done made me feel ashamed of what I hadn't. I read it again and again. Finally, the last paragraph. I'm not asking you for another $1. I'm asking if someday you'll allow me to apologize in person. I folded the letter carefully, set it inside my desk drawer. Some apologies arrive because people need something. Others arrive because people have finally become someone different. I wasn't sure which one this was, but for the first time, I was willing to find out. Almost a year passed before I saw Eleanor again. By then, my life looked nothing like it had before Lauren's wedding. The divorce had long been finalized. I had moved into a smaller home overlooking White Rock Lake. Friends had asked why I didn't keep the enormous estate Ethan and I once shared. My answer was always the same. I don't need a bigger house. What I needed was a lighter life. For the first time in decades, my calendar wasn't filled with obligations that belonged to other people. No emergency wire transfers, no family crises, no last-minute rescues, no pretending someone else deserved the credit. Instead, I rediscovered mornings, coffee on the patio, long walks around the lake, dinner with friends who knew me simply as Victoria, not as someone's wife or someone's financial safety net. Peace turned out to be far more valuable than luxury. My company continued growing. Ironically, stepping away from the emotional weight I'd carried for 22 years made me a better leader. I created a scholarship program for young adults aging out of foster care. Whenever people asked why that cause mattered so much to me, I smiled. Because someone believed in me before I knew how to believe in myself. The first class included 12 students. The following year, 28. By the third year, our foundation had expanded into 3 states. Watching those young people graduate, find careers, and build stable lives gave me a kind of joy no business acquisition ever had. Success felt different when it wasn't measured by balance sheets. It felt human. One afternoon, my assistant walked into my office. "There's a gentleman here asking to see you." "Who is it?" "Ethan." I looked toward the window. "I'll see him." He entered carrying nothing but a plain envelope. No expensive watch, no designer suit, no appearance of someone trying to impress anyone. He looked comfortable, healthier, older, wiser. "Hi, Victoria." "Hi." We sat across from each other. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Finally, he smiled. "I got a job," I heard. He had accepted a position as chief operating officer for a regional manufacturing company. A normal executive salary, long hours, real accountability, no trust funds, no shortcuts. "I'm proud of you," he laughed softly. "That means more than you know." He looked around my office. "I almost didn't come." "Why did you? I owed you something." "You've already apologized." "I wasn't here to apologize." He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a check. It wasn't large, not compared to the money I'd spent over the years. Attached was a handwritten note, "First repayment." I looked up. "Ethan, I know I'll never repay everything. I wasn't expecting you to. I'm not doing it because I owe the money." He smiled. "I'm doing it because I owe the effort." That sentence nearly brought tears to my eyes. For the first time since I'd met him, he fully understood the difference between receiving and earning. "I'll accept it." "You will?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because refusing it would rob you of the chance to become the man you're trying to be." He nodded quietly. "I hoped you'd say that." Before leaving, he stopped at the door. "I loved you, Victoria, I know. I think I spent too many years loving what you gave instead of appreciating who you were." I smiled gently. "I know that too." He walked away. I watched him disappear down the hallway. Oddly enough, I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Some relationships aren't meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach us exactly what we need before they end. 3 months later, Eleanor requested to meet. We chose a quiet cafe, far from the country club where everything had fallen apart. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She still dressed elegantly, but something had changed. The confidence that once demanded attention had been replaced by quiet humility. She sat down slowly. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I would." "I wouldn't have blamed you." She folded her hands. For almost a full minute, she searched for the right words. Finally, they came. I've replayed that day outside Lauren's wedding hundreds of times. I remained silent. I wanted everyone to admire my family. She smiled sadly. And in chasing admiration, I lost the respect of the one person who deserved mine the most. She reached into her purse and placed something on the table. The house key I'd given her, after closing on a much smaller home several months earlier. "I don't want gifts anymore." I looked at the key. "You don't have to return it, I know." She pushed it closer anyway. "I need to." Tears filled her eyes. "I treated generosity like an obligation. I measured your worth by what people thought of you. And I forgot the simplest truth." She looked directly at me. "The strongest people are usually the quietest ones." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached across the table and gently covered her hand with mine. "I forgive you." She closed her eyes, not dramatically, just with relief. "I'm not asking to become family again, I know. I only hoped I wouldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if you'd hate me forever. I don't. Hate is heavy. I've carried enough weight already." She laughed through her tears. "So have I." We left the cafe separately, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, not as enemies, simply as two women who had finally learned that pride costs far more than honesty ever will. People often ask me if I regret paying for that mansion. The answer surprises them. No. Because the money didn't expose who I was. Losing the mansion exposed who everyone else was, including me. I learned that generosity without boundaries eventually becomes permission for disrespect. I learned that silence can protect peace for a little while, but it often sacrifices truth. Most importantly, I learned that forgiveness isn't pretending the past never happened. Forgiveness is choosing not to let the past keep deciding your future. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. Never confuse love with self-sacrifice. The people who truly love you won't ask you to disappear so they can shine. They'll make sure the world knows exactly who stood beside them. And if someone only values you for what you provide, they're not protecting your heart. They're spending it. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of someone, or if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this encourage you to believe that kindness and dignity are never weaknesses, I hope you'll subscribe and join me for the next one. Weiss. Until then, take care of your heart. It's worth far more than any mansion.